Commander Thrax stood at the helm of the Zothrani flagship, his eyes fixed on the holographic projection of Earth. His fleet had already swept through several systems in the past few weeks, leaving behind only ashes and rubble. The Zothrani were efficient in their conquests, and no race had ever managed to resist them for long. The humans, on the other hand, had been nothing more than a curiosity, an unimportant speck in the universe. He had heard reports of their primitive societies and backward technology, but no one had expected them to pose any real threat. "Commander," a subordinate reported, "scans indicate no significant military presence on the planet's surface. It's as we expected, minimal defenses. We will wipe them out in a matter of days." Thrax nodded but kept his expression neutral. It wasn't the first time he'd heard such assurances from his officers. Their overconfidence had become predictable, and in his experience, that often led to mistakes. "Prepare the assault," Thrax commanded. "We will land on their largest cities and show them the might of the Zothrani." The Zothrani had never needed to engage in subtlety. Their warships were massive and intimidating, their weapons destructive. They had torn through entire fleets of alien species with ease, their advanced technology ensuring they were always several steps ahead of any opponent. This would be no different. It was simple: crush the resistance, force the humans to surrender, and claim Earth as the newest addition to the Zothrani Empire. As the fleet descended into Earth's atmosphere, Thrax felt a brief flicker of something he couldn't name. It wasn't fear, but perhaps caution, an instinct he had honed during countless campaigns across the galaxy. But he quickly dismissed it. He had faced far worse opponents before. There was no reason to doubt this victory. Once on the ground, the Zothrani forces easily overran the human defenses. The humans' primitive weapons had no effect on their shields, and their tanks were little more than toys in comparison to the Zothrani war machines. They advanced through cities, laying waste to anything in their path. Thrax's soldiers moved with ruthless efficiency, but something strange happened. As they pushed deeper into the planet, they encountered resistance unlike any they had expected. Small bands of humans, armed with nothing but homemade explosives and old firearms, launched surprise attacks on Zothrani patrols. They were wild, reckless, but shockingly effective. Every time a Zothrani patrol advanced, it would soon be surrounded by a flurry of gunfire and explosions. They weren't skilled soldiers, but they were relentless. Thrax watched as one of his officers, a seasoned veteran, was forced to retreat from a group of human guerrilla fighters. The Zothrani officer had never been bested in combat, yet here he was, struggling to hold his ground against a handful of humans. "Commander," another officer spoke, urgency in his voice. "We've encountered unexpected resistance. They're not surrendering. They're fighting back, more aggressively than anticipated." Thrax frowned. This was not the response he had expected. The humans should have crumbled under the weight of the Zothrani forces, yet they were doing something that no other species had dared to do. They were fighting back. "Increase the pressure," Thrax ordered, though a new feeling began to stir within him. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity. Could these humans really stand their ground against the Zothrani? Would they continue to resist, despite the overwhelming odds? Thrax had underestimated them, and for the first time in his career, he began to wonder if this might not be the simple conquest he had envisioned. Thrax stood on the command bridge of the flagship, his arms crossed tightly as he watched the scene unfold on the massive display screen. The battle had intensified over the past few days. Zothrani forces had swiftly wiped out several of Earth's military bases and infrastructure, but the humans had not buckled. Instead, they had adapted. What was most perplexing was the guerrilla tactics they were employing. Small groups of humans, armed with makeshift weapons, had launched raids against the Zothrani supply chains, sabotaging equipment and wreaking havoc on their advanced machinery. They weren't even using proper military formations. They fought in unpredictable clusters, darting from cover to cover like creatures with nothing to lose. Thrax had watched one of his own armored vehicles disabled by a group of humans, using little more than homemade explosive devices and simple firearms. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were learning. Every time the Zothrani engaged in battle, the humans would change their approach. Where the Zothrani would use their standard military protocols, the humans would find new ways to exploit weaknesses in their tactics. They didn't need a vast fleet or massive armies. Instead, they used speed, improvisation, and above all, resourcefulness. Thrax had never seen anything like it. In all his years of warfare, no species had adapted this quickly to an invasion. "They're unpredictable," Thrax muttered under his breath. Beside him, his second-in-command, Officer Kor, looked at him with confusion. "Commander, the humans are nothing more than vermin. Their weapons are rudimentary. They're using primitive technology. Surely they can't pose a real threat." Thrax's gaze never wavered from the screen. "It's not their technology," he said. "It's how they think. They don't act the way other species do. They don't fight with precision or discipline. They fight with desperation. They'll do anything to survive, and that makes them dangerous." Kor scoffed, but Thrax could tell his officer was uneasy. Something about the human resistance had unsettled even the most hardened of the Zothrani officers. It wasn't just the military setbacks either. There was something deeper. The humans refused to accept the Zothrani as their conquerors. Every time they were pushed back, they came back harder, angrier. It wasn't a submission born of fear. It was a refusal to give up. They had no surrender in their hearts. A low rumble vibrated through the ship as an explosion from Earth's surface rocked the Zothrani lines. Thrax glanced at the data on the display. Another human-led attack. This time, they had targeted one of the Zothrani's primary communication towers, crippling their ability to coordinate attacks. The sheer audacity of it stunned him. "The humans are coordinating," Thrax said, more to himself than to Kor. "They're acting as though they have a plan, as if they know they can win." Kor tilted his head. "Are you saying they do have a plan?" Thrax paused. For the first time since the invasion began, he wasn't certain of the answer. He knew that the Zothrani's overwhelming force had to break the humans eventually, but it wasn't going to be as easy as he had thought. There was something different about Earth, something the Zothrani had underestimated, something that made the humans far more dangerous than they appeared. "Send out more units," Thrax commanded, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. "We cannot allow these petty insurgents to gain ground. Launch a full assault on their cities." His orders were swiftly relayed, but as he gave the command, a thought lingered at the back of his mind. These humans, how could they keep going like this? What drove them to such extremes? He had watched them fight through insurmountable odds, refuse to bow under fire, and yet he still couldn't fully understand them. And for the first time, Commander Thrax was left with an unsettling feeling. The humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. The Zothrani forces had already made significant strides across Earth's surface, but the humans weren't relenting. Commander Thrax had expected them to break under pressure, to crumble when faced with the might of the Zothrani war machines. Instead, they fought harder, and now, for the first time since the invasion began, Thrax found himself at a loss. The battle was in full swing as Zothrani forces advanced toward one of Earth's largest cities. Thrax had personally overseen the operations, confident that it would be nothing more than a final sweep. With the city's defenses destroyed, only scattered human pockets remained, easy pickings for his soldiers. But something had changed. As his forces marched forward, the resistance had grown fiercer. The humans were no longer retreating in disarray. They were rallying. A new strategy was unfolding before Thrax's eyes, one he had not anticipated. Small squads of humans appeared from nowhere, attacking Zothrani units with coordinated precision. They knew their terrain better than the invaders did, using the environment to their advantage. The narrow streets, the rooftops, even the underground tunnels, They were all tools in the humans' arsenal. "Commander, we've encountered trouble," reported Kor, his voice tense. "Our flanks are under attack. We didn't expect such an organized counterattack." Thrax clenched his fists. He had underestimated them again. These weren't the desperate insurgents he had expected. They were skilled. They were coordinated. They were using the very same tactics the Zothrani had perfected in battle, turning the city's infrastructure into a weapon. And despite their technology being far behind the Zothrani, the humans had an advantage the invaders didn't understand. A massive explosion rocked the area to Thrax's right. One of his command vehicles went up in flames. Humans had planted explosives in the streets, hidden beneath debris, and detonated them at just the right moment. It was a direct hit to Zothrani forces, and it caused a chain reaction that disabled several other vehicles in the line. A human resistance fighter appeared from an alleyway, charging forward with an explosive device strapped to his back. He hurled the bomb at a Zothrani war machine, and with a deafening roar, the vehicle exploded into pieces. The man was caught in the blast, but his sacrifice bought time for his comrades to escape. Thrax watched as another group of humans swiftly disappeared into the city's ruins, vanishing into the night like shadows. The Zothrani were fighting a new kind of battle, one that required more than just firepower. They had never encountered such an unpredictable enemy before. There was no pattern to the humans' resistance. Each attack, each ambush, seemed entirely different from the last. It was maddening. "We need to stop them now," Thrax muttered under his breath. "Do whatever it takes. Cut them off at the bridges. Take control of the city center." But the humans were always one step ahead. Every time Zothrani forces advanced, they found themselves outmaneuvered. Another explosion. Another ambush. Another failed attempt to catch the resistance. Thrax's patience was wearing thin. The worst blow came when a squadron of Zothrani warships, designed to decimate cities with ease, was taken down by a surprising human tactic. Using a makeshift network of civilian communication satellites, the humans managed to jam the Zothrani fleet's targeting systems, causing them to miss their marks by miles. In a desperate bid, the fleet launched a final barrage of missiles, only for most of them to veer off course, hitting their own ground forces instead. "Report," Thrax barked, his voice sharp. "Commander, we've lost communication with half of our ground units," came the grim reply. "The humans are attacking us from every direction. The casualties are mounting. We're in a chaotic retreat." Thrax's hands clenched into fists, the frustration clear in his expression. For the first time since the beginning of the invasion, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The sting of defeat. His perfect campaign was unraveling before his eyes, and the humans, with their limited resources and technology, had forced him into a corner. The humans weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for victory. Thrax had come here expecting an easy conquest, but now he realized something far more troubling. The humans weren't afraid. They were defying the odds. They were refusing to submit. And for the first time, Thrax didn't know what to do next. Commander Thrax stood in the war room, his fingers tapping the cold surface of the table. His mind raced. The battle was not going as planned. The humans had proven to be more resilient, more capable than anyone had expected. Zothrani forces had been pushed back from several key cities, and morale among his troops was at an all-time low. Despite their superior technology, they were now on the defensive. "We need to change our approach," Thrax said, his voice low but firm. "This is not a typical conquest. These humans, they don't fight like any race I've encountered. They're resourceful. They're unpredictable." Kor, his second in command, stood beside him, watching the tactical display. "What do you suggest, Commander? If we continue this way, we risk losing everything. Perhaps it's time to reconsider our options." Thrax paused. He had always believed that strength was the key to victory, that sheer firepower and numbers would crush any opposition. But the humans had shown him that there was more to warfare than firepower. They were not going to bend to the will of the Zothrani. The thought of defeat gnawed at him, but he couldn't ignore the facts. The Zothrani were losing ground. "I'm considering a different approach," Thrax said finally. "It's time we offer them an alternative." He turned toward the holographic display and activated a communication channel with the Zothrani High Command. The faces of several high-ranking officials appeared on the screen, their expressions stern. Commander Thrax, one of them, a general with a scar across his face, said, "What is your report? We are receiving troubling updates from your front. Have you not secured victory?" "Not yet," Thrax replied. "These humans are unlike anything we've faced before. Their will to survive is unbreakable. I suggest we change tactics. We could offer them a deal." A murmur ran through the High Command. The Zothrani had never negotiated with the species they conquered. It was unthinkable. Conquest was absolute. Yet, the situation was dire, and Thrax could see the doubt in his superior's eyes. They knew as well as he did that they were running out of time. "A deal?" the general asked, his voice tinged with skepticism, "with a primitive species like the humans?" "Yes," Thrax said, his tone resolute. "We offer them peace. We provide them with advanced technology, protection from other invading forces, and in exchange, they join the Zothrani Empire as a valued ally. They can continue their existence under our protection, but they will serve under our banner." The silence in the room was palpable. This was an unthinkable proposal, even by Zothrani standards. Thrax understood the weight of what he was suggesting. To offer a conquered species a chance to retain their independence, even in a subordinate role, was unheard of. But the humans were different. They were not like other races who cowered at the sight of the Zothrani flag. If anyone could challenge the Zothrani, it was them. After a long pause, the general spoke again. "And if they refuse?" "If they refuse," Thrax said, "we continue the invasion. But we will give them a chance to survive. They deserve that much." The High Command exchanged uncertain glances, and finally, the general nodded. "Prepare the envoy. We'll send an official representative to make the offer." As the transmission ended, Thrax leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He knew the risk involved. The humans had fought too hard for too long to simply bend to an offer of peace, but there was no denying that the Zothrani could not continue on their current path. Their forces were stretched thin, and victory was becoming increasingly elusive. The next day, a small delegation was sent to Earth. Thrax, however, stayed behind to monitor the situation. He watched as the envoy made contact with the human leaders, delivering the offer. The humans listened intently, their faces unreadable. Thrax was curious, but a part of him doubted the humans would accept the Zothrani's offer. After all, they had already shown that they were willing to die for their freedom. Would they really choose survival over independence? Hours later, the response came. The humans had rejected the offer. Not only had they rejected it, but they had made a bold counteroffer of their own. They would not submit to Zothrani rule. Instead, they would fight until every last invader was driven from their planet. They would rather die than live under the thumb of the Zothrani. Thrax stood in silence, his mind racing. This wasn't the response he had expected, but it was the response he had feared. The humans had rejected the offer, and now the true nature of the conflict was clear. It wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a fight for freedom. The rejection of the Zothrani offer hit Commander Thrax like a shockwave. He had thought that, after everything, the humans might see reason, that they might realize the futility of further resistance. But they had rejected peace outright, and their response only deepened the mystery surrounding them. They were not like other species. No other race had ever refused an offer of survival in exchange for their submission. Thrax stood in the war room, the latest intelligence reports flickering on the screens around him. His forces were scattered, their progress stalled by relentless human guerrilla warfare. The humans were everywhere, small groups attacking Zothrani patrols, setting traps in the cities, and launching ambushes from the most unexpected places. The fight was no longer just about defeating an invading force. It was about survival for both sides. Kor entered the room, his face drawn and serious. "Commander, we've received word that human resistance leaders have managed to unite several factions across the globe. They're organizing more coordinated attacks. They're growing bolder." Thrax clenched his fists, the frustration mounting inside him. He had underestimated them once again. The humans weren't just reacting. They were planning, adapting, and learning from their mistakes. They were no longer scattering in fear. They were fighting with purpose. "We can't allow them to regroup," Thrax said, his voice sharp. "We need to break their will. If we continue like this, they'll continue to rise up, stronger each time. We must find a way to cripple their morale. We could escalate the attack, destroy their cities," Kor suggested, his voice laced with a hint of aggression. "We'll burn everything to the ground." Thrax turned sharply to face his officer. "No, we'll do no such thing." Kor blinked in surprise. "But Commander, they're only human. What's stopping us from crushing them completely?" Thrax's gaze turned cold as he studied the data, his mind processing the implications of their previous losses. The Zothrani were capable of obliterating entire worlds, and they had the firepower to do it. But something in Thrax told him that the humans couldn't be defeated that way. They didn't break like other species. They didn't fear destruction in the same way. "If we destroy their cities, wipe out their people," Thrax's voice trailed off, as if he was weighing the words, "we'll never stop them. They're fighting for something more than their survival. They're fighting for their freedom. Destroying them will only make them more determined." Kor looked at him skeptically, but Thrax's expression was resolute. "We need to find a way to fracture their unity. We need to separate them. We can't keep fighting them as a whole. Not anymore." Kor hesitated, but then nodded, understanding the weight of Thrax's words. "What do you propose, Commander?" Thrax leaned over the table, staring at the globe projected before him. He had seen the human resistance fight with resourcefulness, but there was something more. The humans were connected. Their unity, though flawed, was their strength. They fought as one, no matter the cost. "It's time to divide and conquer," Thrax said slowly. "We need to target their leadership, isolate their strongest factions. We take down their symbols of unity, their leaders, their communication networks, their strongholds. If we fracture their coordination, we can weaken them." Kor nodded again, already planning how to carry out the operation. "We will strike at their heart then. We have intelligence that suggests they're gathering their leaders in a secure location. We take that out, and the resistance will fall apart." But Thrax was not so sure. He had seen how the humans adapted to every move he made, how they learned from their failures and grew stronger. Their leaders weren't the only driving force behind their fight. They were fueled by something deeper. It wasn't just about the people in charge. It was about the entire species, the very idea of resistance itself. As the operations began, Thrax couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing a dangerous game. Every step he took against the humans only seemed to make them fight harder. They had rejected the offer of survival, but their resolve only seemed to strengthen as the battle raged on. By the time Thrax's forces launched their assault on the human stronghold, the resistance was already waiting. They had predicted the move. A full-scale counterattack ensued, and for the first time, Thrax's forces were caught off guard. The humans weren't only defending. They were attacking with a precision that the Zothrani had never encountered before. It was as if the humans had anticipated their every move. Thrax clenched his teeth as the battle unfolded. His forces were struggling to maintain control, and he couldn't shake the growing realization that he had underestimated the true power of the humans. They were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting for something much larger. He had opened a door he couldn't close, and now it was too late to turn back. The battle for Earth had reached a fever pitch. Despite the Zothrani's overwhelming technological superiority, Commander Thrax was beginning to realize that the conflict was not as straightforward as he had believed. His forces were struggling to maintain their position, constantly facing unexpected tactics from the humans. No matter how many times they were pushed back, they returned, stronger, faster, more determined. The human resistance was more organized than ever. Every move the Zothrani made seemed to be anticipated. The humans had even begun launching their own offensives, targeting Zothrani supply lines and harassing their communication networks. It was as if Earth itself had become a battlefield where every inch was contested with a tenacity Thrax had never seen before. Thrax stood before the holographic display, his hands clenched into fists. Reports came in one after another. His war machines were disabled, his air superiority disrupted, and his fleet's communications were being intercepted. The humans had become more than just an annoyance. They were now a serious threat. "Commander," Kor spoke, interrupting Thrax's thoughts. "We've lost another key position. The humans are attacking the eastern supply depot. Our forces are outnumbered." Thrax's eyes flicked to the display. The humans had somehow managed to coordinate a large-scale assault, overwhelming the Zothrani in one of their most secure areas. This was no random attack. It was a well-planned strike. The humans had learned how to use their numbers, their terrain, and their knowledge of the Zothrani's weaknesses against them. "They're learning faster than we anticipated," Thrax said, his voice dark with frustration. "We can't keep losing ground like this." Kor nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What are your orders, Commander? Do we retreat and regroup, or do we press on?" Thrax stood still for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing on him. His instincts told him to fight harder, to unleash the full force of the Zothrani war machine and crush the resistance once and for all. But something inside him hesitated. The humans were different. They didn't fight for simple survival. They fought for something more, something that made them harder to break than any species he had ever faced. "Send word to the High Command," Thrax said finally. "I want all available resources redirected to capturing their leadership. If we can break their command structure, we can end this war. The humans are too coordinated. If we can cripple their leaders, the rest will fall apart." Kor acknowledged the command and began transmitting orders. As the information flowed through the ship's channels, Thrax's mind continued to churn. He couldn't help but think that this new tactic, this attempt to shatter the humans' resolve, would not be as easy as it seemed. Their unity, their resistance, it wasn't just about the leadership. It was about every human standing together, fighting for a common cause. Days later, Zothrani forces launched a massive assault on one of the major resistance strongholds, hoping to capture or kill the key leaders who had been rallying the human forces. It was a final push to break their spirit. But as the Zothrani forces approached, they were met with something unexpected, an organized, massive counterattack. The humans had fortified their position. Their response was quick and effective. The ground shook with explosions as a fleet of human-made war machines, hastily constructed but surprisingly effective, slammed into the Zothrani lines. These weren't the typical guerrilla tactics the invaders had faced. These were deliberate strikes meant to hold them off, to buy time. Thrax watched the battle unfold, his eyes narrowed. For the first time, he felt the edge of uncertainty. "They're adapting too fast," he muttered, his frustration growing. He couldn't deny it. The humans were not just surviving. They were evolving their strategies in real time. The longer this war dragged on, the more they learned, the stronger they became. As the battle raged on, Thrax's forces began to realize that the Zothrani were not invincible after all. The humans had forced them to a standstill, and for the first time, Thrax considered that the price of victory might be higher than he had expected. In a remote part of the battlefield, a small group of human fighters led a diversionary assault, drawing the bulk of the Zothrani forces away from the main resistance leaders. Thrax's eyes widened as he realized what they were doing, buying their leaders precious time to escape. The humans were willing to sacrifice themselves for their cause, and that commitment gave them a strength the Zothrani could not match. The realization hit Thrax hard. It wasn't the Zothrani who had control over the battlefield anymore. The humans had something far more powerful on their side. Hope. The war had reached a turning point. Commander Thrax stood at the edge of the Zothrani command center, staring at the holographic map that projected Earth's scared landscape. His forces were no longer advancing. In fact, they were slowly being pushed back. The humans had taken several key territories, and now their counterattacks were becoming more frequent and effective. The Zothrani were accustomed to crushing lesser species quickly, but the humans had proven to be something else entirely. No matter how many battles they lost, no matter how many they had to retreat from, they came back fighting harder. Their resilience was unlike anything Thrax had anticipated. He had been prepared for a long war, but not for one that stretched his forces to the breaking point. "Commander, we've received troubling reports." Kor's voice cut through Thrax's thoughts. "Our supply lines are stretched thin, and we've lost contact with the Western Front. The humans have begun launching full-scale offensives in multiple sectors. If we don't consolidate our forces, we may lose the initiative." Thrax turned to face his second-in-command. His mind raced as he considered the situation. He had fought wars across the galaxy, crushed empires far larger than Earth's. Yet here he was, facing a species that by all measures should have been overwhelmed by now. "We've underestimated them," Thrax said quietly. "The humans, there's more to them than we realized. They don't crumble under pressure, they rise." Kor remained silent for a moment, and then, with a sharp nod, he spoke. "What's our next move, Commander?" "The High Command insists we escalate the invasion. We have the resources, but I'm not sure we can win without risking everything." Thrax considered the options laid before him. His pride, his belief in Zothrani dominance, told him to continue pushing forward, to crush the humans once and for all. But a deeper part of him, one he didn't want to acknowledge, felt the weight of this decision. The humans were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for freedom. And that gave them power beyond what Thrax could ever understand. They were united in a way that his forces couldn't replicate. They fought with heart, something the Zothrani had never truly known. "Send word to the High Command," Thrax said, his voice firm but weighed with uncertainty. "We cannot escalate without further planning. If we destroy their cities, we may win the battle, but lose the war. I want to isolate their leadership and prevent their forces from regrouping, but I also want to offer them one final chance to negotiate." Kor blinked in surprise. "A chance to negotiate, Commander? After everything?" Thrax nodded slowly. "Yes, if we can convince their leaders that continuing this war is futile, they may choose survival. The humans value their freedom above all else, but they also know the cost of war. We need to offer them a choice, one that ensures they have a future, even under Zothrani rule." Kor hesitated but then bowed his head. "Understood. I'll prepare the terms for negotiation." The next few days were tense as Thrax's forces prepared to launch a new offensive. At the same time, emissaries were sent to human leadership, bearing the offer of peace. It was a gamble. The Zothrani were offering more than just survival. They were offering a chance for the humans to thrive under their protection, something no species had ever been offered before. But as the message reached Earth's leaders, Thrax couldn't help but wonder if they would even entertain the idea. After all, the humans had already rejected a similar offer. Would they reconsider in the face of complete annihilation? The answer came sooner than expected. In a remote command center, the human leaders convened, discussing the Zothrani offer. Despite their pride and unity, the reality of the situation was hard to ignore. The Zothrani were overwhelming. The continued destruction of their cities and the loss of life had taken a toll on them. But there was something else. The humans had something that the Zothrani could not replicate: hope. One of the human leaders, General Carla Hayes, stood up, her face resolute. "We've already rejected their offer once. They think we're just fighting for survival, but this war is more than that. We fight for our future. We fight for our children, our freedom. And we will not surrender that, not even to the Zothrani." Her words echoed in the room, and the leaders nodded in agreement. The humans would not accept peace under Zothrani rule. They would continue to fight, no matter the odds. The response was sent: "We will not submit. We will fight until the last." Thrax watched the response come in, his expression unreadable. He had known this was a possibility, but hearing it, seeing it in writing, made something shift inside him. The humans were not merely fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for something far more powerful, a future of their own choosing. The war was no longer just about conquest. It was about something far deeper, and for the first time, Thrax questioned whether victory for the Zothrani was even possible. The war had become a test of endurance. The Zothrani and the humans had fought tooth and nail for every inch of Earth, and now it was clear that neither side would give in easily. Commander Thrax stood in the command center, staring at the holographic map that displayed the current positions of both forces. His troops had been stretched thin, and despite their superior technology, the humans' relentless resolve was wearing them down. The latest intelligence reports confirmed what Thrax had feared. The humans were organizing their final counteroffensive. They had gathered every resource they had left, every soldier and every fighter, preparing for one last stand. The humans had no intention of surrendering, no matter what. "This is it," Thrax said, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "They're going to hit us with everything they have. If we don't stop them now, we'll lose all the ground we've gained." Kor stood beside him, his posture tense. "Should we deploy the full might of the Zothrani fleet? A decisive strike will end this war. We can obliterate their stronghold." Thrax's expression was grim. He had long believed that overwhelming force was the solution. But now, as the humans gathered for their final push, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war was about something more than just military power. They weren't fighting for survival anymore. The humans were fighting for their future, for the right to live free of the Zothrani's rule. Their resilience had become a force of its own, something that even the might of the Zothrani could not easily crush. "No," Thrax said, shaking his head. "We won't use the full fleet. We'll fight them in a way they understand. We'll meet them on the ground, and we'll prove that our will is stronger than theirs." Kor looked at him with surprise but said nothing. He knew Thrax's strategy was risky, but he also knew the commander's mind was made up. The Zothrani had always prided themselves on their military superiority, but this was not a simple battle of weapons. It was a clash of ideals. The final battle began with a thunderous roar. The human forces, organized and determined, charged into battle with a fury that was almost indescribable. Zothrani war machines and troops lined up against them, prepared for the coming onslaught. The battlefield became a storm of gunfire, explosions, and the clash of metal. The humans fought like there was no tomorrow, using every scrap of their knowledge and every ounce of their strength. Commander Thrax led his troops from the front, his resolve as strong as ever. He had never encountered an enemy like this. For every blow the Zothrani struck, the humans came back with even more force. They didn't retreat. They didn't falter. They fought as though the entire future of their species depended on it. Because it did. Hours passed, and the Zothrani forces began to feel the strain. Their advanced technology, once so superior, was being chipped away by the humans' ingenuity. The human fighters adapted to every tactic the Zothrani threw at them, and it became evident that the tide of battle was shifting. Thrax's forces were losing ground, not because they lacked firepower, but because the humans had something far more powerful: unity. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their freedom, for the right to determine their own future. That was a power the Zothrani could not easily overcome. As the battle raged on, Thrax's mind raced. Could it be possible? Could the humans really win? Every part of him had believed that the Zothrani were unstoppable, that no force in the galaxy could stand against them. But now he wasn't so sure. In the distance, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield, followed by the sounds of human fighters closing in on the last Zothrani stronghold. The Zothrani forces were in full retreat. Thrax's command center erupted with chaos as reports flooded in, each one worse than the last. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had breached the final line. Thrax stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what this meant. It wasn't just a battle that had been lost. It was the war. The humans had won. As the Zothrani began to withdraw, Thrax's gaze turned to the horizon. Earth was scared, the cities in ruins, but the humans had prevailed. They had fought not just for their lives, but for something greater, their right to exist on their own terms. For the first time, Thrax understood the true cost of conquest. He had come to Earth with the belief that victory was inevitable, but the humans had taught him a powerful lesson. Victory wasn't just about force. It was about the strength of spirit, the power of unity, and the unbreakable will to protect what mattered most. The Zothrani may have won battles, but in the end, they had lost the war. Earth had changed, and the humans had shown the universe that even the mightiest empire could be challenged and defeated.